Now that we've integrated our check-int function into our program, it's working well, it has the appropriate functionality that we want, and we're going to look at how we can streamline and improve our code through this process of refactoring. All that means is we're going to restructure our code. The actual outcomes won't change, what it does won't change, but the way it does it changes, and we're looking at how we can improve our code by using functions. So for this we're going to use our guessing game code that we've constructed so far. At the top we've got our check-int function that we just defined. Then if we look at the next line of code, or the next block of code, we have all of our intro print statements where we get the name, and then we explain some of the rules to them. And then we get on to our repeat section. Now this is a little bit clunky with the way that we've got it repeating, and this big while loop that kind of has lots of things nested within it. And we can streamline that a little bit by putting that main section of our code into a function, and we'll actually call that function main. That will enable us just to have a simple loop that loops around and repeats that main function over and over again as the user requests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at everything that's inside this repeat loop. So this is the loop that's activated or controlled by the user typing in an answer to this question. So we ask them would they like to play again. If they type yes, then we go back up to the top of this loop, and we repeat everything in there. So everything that's part of that loop, so everything from here down to the bottom of that section there, and not including that part there, I'm going to cut that and remove it from our main routine. Remember, the main routine is everything that's not part of the function. Then up here underneath my check-int function, I'm going to create a new function. So it must be on the left hand side of our page, not indented at all, and I'm going to call this one main, and there's going to be no parameters to pass into it. Then I can just paste in the code that we had, and the indentation is all still looking good. Remember, we have to have everything that's part of our function indented, and of course we have the additional indentation going on with our while loops, if loops, and so on. If statements rather, and so on. Then down to the bottom here, this line here is the first line that's not indented, so that is no longer part of that function, and we know that when we execute this, this main function is made up of all of this code, and just that code, because this line is not indented. So now let's see what happens if we actually run our code. We've still got all the same code, it's just in a different place. It's now become part of this function, so let's run it. So first thing, this function is read in, but we don't execute this code. This function, the main one, is also read in, but we don't execute any of that code. So the first thing that's going to happen is this line here, or this block of code here, which prints our welcome statements. So we enter our name, and straight away we've got our instructions here, and then it's asking us if we want to play again, because we have removed all of that code that was part of this loop here. So we've gone straight down to this section here. We need to have some way of activating that main routine that we put everything into. So before all of this repeat loop and everything like that, I'm just going to put in a couple of blank lines just to structure this a little bit nicer, and type main and then brackets, because remember that's the name of this loop, this function that we've created. So main, then two brackets, we're not passing any information into it. This will call that function and activate that function. So now if I run it once more, we have the same intro screen, and now we go through and it asks us to enter our guess. So if I enter a number that's too low, a number that's too high, and a number that's correct. Cool, and now it's asked us if we want to play again. Now let's see what happens if I type in yes here. It just goes straight back and asks us would we like to play again. So there's something still wrong here. And looking at the code that we've got, we call the main function from our main routine, and we call that just once, but that's not part of our loop here. So one solution, we could move this code down inside our loop. So now when we run our program, after we've done the intro, we set repeat to yes, and then that will mean that we go through this loop, because this evaluates to true, and we run the main routine, which has our main set of code. Then once we've done that, we go to the repeat, we update the repeat variable by asking the user if they'd like to play again, converting it to lowercase and removing any trailing spaces from it. And then we go back, if they've said yes, we go back through that main routine again. So that all looks pretty good. Let's test it to make sure it's working. We'll go one too low, one too high, and let's check that we can get it right. Cool, and now it asks us if we want to play again. Let's try and test to make sure our lower case method is still working, and we go back around. Great, so that's all working as well. I'll just test that we can end our program, and there we go. That's perfect. So we've refactored our program a little bit now. We've put the main section of our program into a main routine, and that streamlines the loop that we've got here. We could also put this whole intro section into a loop, into a function as well. So everything that we've got here, just to make everything a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to cut that out as well. Remove some of the white space. And it doesn't actually matter the order of these functions that you put them in, but I'm going to put it in before the main function because that kind of makes sense. And I'll just call this one intro, again with no parameters, and paste that all in. You can see that our indentation is a little messed up this time, so I'm going to select all of those lines, press tab, and now they're all in line, and they're therefore part of this function. Then the next line that's unindented after this is the introduction to the main function, so that's perfect. I'm just going to go through and tidy it up, make sure I've got an individual space between each function. It doesn't actually matter for the execution of your program, but you just want it to look nice and tidy. And then down here we get into our main routine. So again, we need to actually call that intro function because we haven't done it yet. So I'm going to put that code in there that will call and activate that intro function. Then after that we get straight into our loop that we set up before, which calls our main routine. Let's just run it one more time to make sure that intro is working. And straight into the game, and yes, that's all still working, so it's looking good. Okay, so that's it for this video. Go through this process with your own code, make sure you can streamline it, refactor it, and you can understand what's happening as we're putting different sections of code into these functions. As our programs get bigger and more complex, we might even use this to introduce menu systems where people can choose from a range of options, and then based on that range, or based on what they choose, you'll run different functions. So it's a really important concept and a really good one to experiment with.